like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.
Okay, so picture this, right? Like a busy Manhattan street, everyone rushing around, and then suddenly a high-profile CEO is shot and killed.
In broad daylight.
Yeah, in broad daylight.
Wow.
It's the kind of story that just grabs you and makes you think there's got to be more to this, and that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're diving into a bunch of news reports about the murder of Brian Thompson.
The CEO of UnitedHealthcare.
Exactly, and the eventual arrest of the suspect.
Yeah, it is a shocking case, and in some ways a familiar one, too. It brings up all those anxieties we have about corporate power and gun violence.
For sure. And what makes it even more fascinating is that as the investigation went on, all these seemingly random details started connecting like pieces of a puzzle.
Like what kind of details?
Well, we've got a cryptic message on the shell casings.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Delay, deny, defend.
Exactly. Then there's a cross-country bus trip, and then the suspect is found with monopoly money and a handwritten manifesto.
It's like something out of a movie.
It really is.
That message on the shell casings, delay, deny, defend. It seems like it speaks directly to that feeling a lot of people have that institutions just don't care, particularly healthcare.
Yeah, it's almost like the suspect took a common complaint and turned it into a reason to kill.
Yeah, twisted it around.
It really makes you wonder, was this just a personal thing, or could it be a sign of something wrong with society as a whole?
That's the question we're going to unpack today. So let's start by talking about Brian Thompson.
The CEO of UnitedHealthcare.
Right, one of the biggest healthcare companies in the country. A position like that comes with power, but also a lot of scrutiny. So what kind of figure was he?
Well, from everything I've read, he seems like a complicated guy.
Right.
He took over as CEO in 2017 and was known for being a shrewd businessman. He really grew the company.
Right.
But his time as CEO also saw a ton of debate about the role of these giant insurance companies in our healthcare system.
That's important to remember. The U.S. healthcare system is really complicated. There's a lot of anger about rising costs and insurance companies denying coverage and tons of bureaucracy. It's not surprising that a guy like Thompson would be both praised and criticized.
Absolutely. So we have this powerful CEO in an industry that makes a lot of Americans really frustrated. And then on December 4th, he's shot and killed outside his hotel in Manhattan.
Can you imagine? Just another day in the city and suddenly there's a murder scene?
I know, right? At first, all the police had was a blurry image from a security camera of a masked figure trying to find one person in a city with millions of people. Must have been impossible.
Plus, the mask made it even harder. But they did have the shell casings and that message.
That's right. Delay, deny, defend. It's not just some random phrase. It points to a very specific complaint.
It's interesting to think about the psychology of it. The suspect took a common criticism of insurance companies and turned it into something violent. It shows how frustration can become really dangerous if it's not dealt with.
And while the police were investigating, the public was going crazy online.
Yeah.
People were sharing stories about their own experiences with the healthcare system, speculating about motives, and in some corners of the internet, even saying the killing was justified.
It shows how much healthcare affects people personally. This case became a way for people to express a lot of pent-up anger and resentment.
Definitely. It got so bad that Governor Hochul had to make a statement reminding everyone that a man had died and that inflammatory language wasn't helpful.
It was a good reminder that news travels fast online and that a single case can get caught up in all sorts of emotions. It can be hard to separate genuine debate from harmful rhetoric.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So while this was happening online, investigators were doing their work, analyzing every piece of evidence they had.
Like what?
Well, they were hoping to get DNA from a water bottle and an energy bar wrapper and maybe fingerprints from a burner phone.
It's like a giant puzzle, right?
Yeah. And out of nowhere, a huge break in the case. An employee at a McDonald's in Pennsylvania recognized the suspect from the news and called the cops.
Really? In Pennsylvania?
Yeah. It just goes to show you that sometimes the most important clues come from the most ordinary places.
That's true. What was he doing in Pennsylvania days after the shooting? Was he trying to hide, or was it something more planned?
That's what's so weird. He wasn't hiding out somewhere remote. He was out in public. So the cops arrest him, and what did they find?
Well, they found some scary stuff. A ghost gun that might have been 3D printed, multiple fake IDs, and maybe most disturbingly, a 2-page handwritten document railing against corporations.
Wait, hold on. A ghost gun. I've heard about those, but I'm not really sure what they are.
A lot of people aren't. Ghost guns are basically firearms that are impossible to trace because they don't have serial numbers. They can be made from parts bought online, and sometimes they're even 3D printed, so it's really hard to control who has them.
So this guy had A weapon that couldn't be traced to him, fake IDs, and a rant against corporations. It sounds planned out.
It does, but it also makes you think what was going through his head. Was it carefully planned, or was it more impulsive, more driven by some dark emotions?
Yeah, that's what I don't get. We have the bus trip, the fake IDs, the ghost gun. It all seems calculated. But then there's this handwritten stuff that makes you think maybe there's a mental health issue going on too.
It's definitely complicated. It's hard to know what pushed him over the edge. But it seems like he didn't threaten anyone else specifically. From what we know now, it seems like an isolated event fueled by his own issues.
So even though this case has people worried about copycats, it seems like the police are focused on figuring out what led this specific person to do this.
Yeah, it's a reminder that these events are complicated and we need to look beyond the surface to understand them.
Definitely. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at that document he wrote and try to understand what motivated him to do this.
It's like a good place to start.
So we were talking about that document the suspect wrote. It had some pretty scary stuff in it. What exactly did he say?
Well, two lines really jumped out at me, both really creepy. In one part, he wrote, "These parasites had it coming." It's like he was echoing that message on the shell casings, you know?
Delay, deny, defend.
Right. It gives you a sense of how much he hated corporate America, especially the healthcare industry.
It's like he was dehumanizing them, calling them parasites, so it'd be easier to justify what he did.
Sadly, that's something you see a lot in these types of cases. They use language to make the victim seem less than human. It's a scary example of how words can be used to manipulate people and even lead to violence.
And the other quote is like he was trying to apologize, but also say he had to do it. He wrote, "I do apologize for any strife and trauma, but it had to be done."
Yeah, it's weird, right? Like, he knows he hurt people, but he also thinks he was in the right. It makes you wonder what led him to that point. Was it like a long-time grudge, or was there something that set him off?
That's what's so confusing about all this. We have the bus trip, the fake IDs, the ghost gun, like he was planning something. But then this document makes you think maybe he was mentally unstable too.
It's definitely a mix of things. It's impossible to know for sure what pushed him over the edge, but it seems like he wasn't making threats against anyone specific. It seems like an isolated incident.
So even though this case has people worried about copycats, it seems like the police are focused on figuring out what led this one guy to do this.
Exactly. It's a reminder that these events are complex and we can't just look at the surface to understand them.
For sure. Which brings us back to the ghost gun and all the problems it creates for the police. Can you explain how 3D printing a gun works? How easy is it?
It's getting easier, unfortunately. 3D printing technology has advanced so much now that you can download blueprints for gun parts and print them out with a relatively cheap 3D printer. These printers use layers of plastic or metal to build an object based on a digital model.
So anyone with some technical skills in a 3D printer could basically make a gun at home.
It's pretty scary, and because these ghost guns don't have serial numbers, they can't be traced. That makes it really hard for the police to track them.
That's a nightmare for investigators.
Yeah.
This case already had a lot going on. A high-profile victim, a cryptic message, a suspect who disappears, and now you add an untraceable gun to the mix. It's like the rules don't matter anymore.
It is a chilling thought. Someone can just sidestep gun laws, make a weapon at home, and commit a violent act, and it's almost impossible to trace back to them. That was unthinkable just a few years ago.
You have to wonder if this case will change how people think about ghost guns and 3D printed weapons. Will there be stricter laws, or is it too late?
There's definitely been more debate about it, and this case will make those conversations even more intense. People who want stricter laws argue that ghost guns are a huge danger to public safety. But people who are against it say the government is overreaching and violating the Second Amendment.
It's a really tough issue with no easy answers, but it's something we can't ignore anymore. This case might be tragic, but at least it's brought the issue to everyone's attention.
Yeah, it's not just a theoretical debate now, it's real life. And let's not forget the context of all this, the American healthcare system, a system that a lot of people find confusing, frustrating, and even predatory.
Exactly. Remember all the comments online? People were sharing their own bad experiences with insurance companies and medical bills. They feel like the system is against them.
This case was about one person's actions, but it definitely tapped into that widespread frustration. It's like the suspect's anger, even though it was misguided and destructive, spoke to a lot of people who feel helpless against a system they think is unfair.
It's like they say the personal is political. This was a horrible personal tragedy, but it also started a political debate about healthcare in America.
That's a debate that isn't going away. This case might actually push people to have deeper conversations about healthcare reform, about corporate responsibility, about how to deal with the underlying causes of anger and despair.
So we've talked about a lot: the victim, the suspect, the evidence, the ghost gun public reaction. But there's one thing we need to look at more closely.
The suspect's trip from Atlanta to New York 10 days before the shooting.
Right. What was he doing during that time? Was he planning everything out, or was something else going on?
That's a great question. It's been bugging me too. It's like a missing piece of the puzzle. If we can understand those 10 days, maybe we can figure out what his motives were and how he ended up on that Manhattan street.
Exactly. Those 10 days could be the key to understanding what he was thinking. Did he have a plan, or was he just drifting? Did he talk to anyone? Maybe someone who could tell us what his state of mind was. To answer those questions, we need to look at the timeline, retrace his steps, and try to figure out what happened during those 10 days.
So we left off talking about that bus trip from Atlanta to New York. It seems like he was on some kind of mission, but we still don't know much about what he did during those 10 days.
Yeah, that time period is still a mystery. We know he got on the bus in Atlanta, and 10 days later he was in New York checking into a hostel with a fake ID. But what happened in between is anyone's guess.
It's like we're missing a big chunk of the story. We know the beginning and the end, but not the middle. It feels like those 10 days before the shooting might hold the answers to some of our questions. You're right. Was he focused on his plan the whole time, or were there moments where he had second thoughts? Did he talk to anyone who could tell us what he was thinking? Those are the things investigators are trying to find out.
And what about his time in New York before the shooting? Was he just waiting for the right moment, or was he scouting out locations planning his attack?
That's another part of the puzzle. We know he stayed at that hostel on the Upper West Side using a fake ID, but what else was he doing? Where did he go? Who did he meet?
It's crazy how much we still don't know about this case.
That's how these investigations go sometimes. Every new piece of evidence opens up more questions. It's a process of constantly trying to understand what happened and why. It's about figuring out what was going on in the mind of the person who did this.
You realize these cases aren't just about catching the bad guy. They're also about understanding the whole story.
Absolutely. And that understanding is important not just for solving this crime, but for learning from it, so we can try to prevent something like this from happening again.
All right, so let's try to put everything together. We have a CEO shot in broad daylight, a suspect with a ghost gun and a manifesto, a public that's struggling with a broken healthcare system. And through it all, this mystery about the suspect's trip from Atlanta to New York.
It's a case that's really captured people's attention, and I can see why it touches on so many things that worry us. Power violence, the systems that control our lives. It shows us that even in a place like New York City, tragedy can happen at any time. It makes you question how safe we really are.
It's also important to remember that there are real people whose lives were changed forever by this event. Brian Thompson's family, who are grieving the suspect's family, who are struggling with what he did.
And it's not just the families.
Right.
This case has made people talk about gun control, mental health, the role of corporations in our lives. And it's brought to light the anger that a lot of people feel towards a system that they think is rigged against them.
I think the biggest takeaway for our listeners is that we can't just forget about this case. It's a wake-up call. We have to talk about these hard issues and work towards solutions. We need to create a society where these kinds of tragedies don't happen.
I agree. We can't ignore the problems in our society. This case has shown us how vulnerable we are. It's a reminder that we're all connected and that we need to work together to build a better world, a world that's fair and peaceful.
We've talked about a lot in this deep dive, the evidence, the motives, the bigger picture. But like always, we want to leave you with something to think about.
Here's a question. Is this case a sign that our society is becoming more angry and violent? Or is it just an isolated incident caused by one troubled person? And more importantly, what can we do to understand each other better and prevent this from happening again?
That's a question we're thinking about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're a Barbie doll.